I'd like to explain a little bit why I think it's important that this research is done into exactly how students start sentences. As a teacher of language for a number of years, whenever you teach sentence level writing, you always start at the beginning of a sentence. The beginning, therefore, often gets a lot of focus in class time. In academic English classes, it's typical to see this kind of contrast where you have syntax like this on the right. The committee decided to defer the project for now, and their reasons for this were complex. Where you have words like committee and there, which are references to personal entities in some ways. And then we're told academic English is less personal, more distanced. And you might want to turn your verb decided into a noun decision, so you've made a nominalization. This can help with condensing the number of words, writing concisely, packing in information. So your resultant sentences, the reasons behind the decision to defer were complex. Obviously that is fewer words, so you get the idea there. It's less conversational. So apprentice writers are encouraged to write concisely, using a less personal tone, but we often kind of base on intuition. Well, these are the kinds of ways sentences begin. This is the kind of syntax. Yes, you're supposed to write noun phrases. The variations which are common in academic writing are, and we don't really know. We might have a course book or something, but as far as I know, there is no research in this area. Brief introduction to a debate within the field of teaching English for academic purposes. Broadly speaking, you could provide provision that is considered English for general academic purposes, English for specific academic purposes, and in simplest terms, the assumptions behind general or the EGAP approach is that there are features of the writing, features of academic English which are so general that no matter what discipline you're talking about, at a certain level of apprenticeship in writing, you basically need to know them. An example of this would be the academic word list, which is presented as something which would be generally applicable to a very wide range of students doing different disciplines. This is in contrast to English for specific academic purposes, or ESAP, where the argument is basically that, well, no, hang on a minute, if you're doing physics for undergrad, you're going to need to learn a whole different set of genre and language and disciplinary norms compared to someone who's doing philosophy, no matter what your starting point in terms of the language. This division is important because it frames the research question to an extent and will help you interpret some of the things I'm saying in this presentation. My definition of accomplished student writer is simply that you've been included in the BOAR corpus. This is a corpus of 6.5 million running words, 30 disciplines, 13 genres of writing from 4 universities. The only pieces of writing that got included were those graded at either merit or distinction. So by definition, sort of the writing of weaker students or less accomplished students wasn't included. This forms a body of work that can be interrogated. It's organised, or it can be divided into different sort of demographic and other categories. So for example, all of the individual writing is tagged in a disciplinary group: arts and humanities, life sciences, physical sciences, social sciences, and it's also tagged for year of study from the first 3 years of undergrad up to masters. So I've given you a few building blocks. Hopefully you're ready for the research questions. What are the most common syntax patterns starting sentences in the BOAR corpus from the start of the sentence, first word, up until the first main verb? I'm looking for things, that really are kind of like noun phrases, any forms of syntax that are typical up to the first time you say can do, can be, will find, anything like that. Stop there, just tell me the first bit. And then is the distribution of these frequent syntax patterns significantly higher or lower in any of those 4 disciplinary groups or a particular year of study? This obviously feeds into the debate about general English or specific English, academic English for specific purposes, because if you get structures that are very high in one area and very low in another area, then perhaps shouldn't be teaching that to everybody and not with the same priority anyway. This is the quick version of the data collection story. I'm happy to give you the full methodology if you want it. Basically, you get all the text files from the assignments in BOAR, 6.5 million words. You tag them all with software, so you find out where the verbs are, where the nouns are, where the adjectives are. And then instead of keeping the words, you delete the words, so you just are left with syntax patterns: noun, verb, adjective, adverb. So you can't, you've got a huge amount of data there. So then for each syntax string length, from 4 words, 5 words, 6 words, up to 10, I've searched the top 500 results to find out strings which end in a main verb. So basically, you've got a spreadsheet, and every time you've got a repeated pattern of 4 words long that ends in a main verb, I basically took it and I included it on that basis into an initial list. To give you an idea of what that looks like, you basically get a string like determiner, noun, preposition, determiner, noun, to infinitive, which in normal language looks like the reasons behind the decision to defer. Remember that from the first slide. So that's what that looks like in sort of syntax language, at least the way I defined it. And out of interest, to sort of go back to like, why are we doing this? That sort of feels like, to me, like a fairly common, like, well, that kind of syntax could occur quite a lot in student writing. Determiner, noun, preposition, nice infinitive on the end. It looks lovely. It's the kind of thing we might teach. If you get a chance, click the link, but I'll tell you, there's only one of these syntax starts, one sentence that starts with this syntax in the whole of BOAR, and that's a lot of sentences. We can't always trust our intuition on these things. I've shared a spreadsheet with the key results from this, but basically it comes out something like this, organized in terms of frequency with examples and for teaching purposes, an explanation of what the actual parts are in terms of their syntax. And what's apparent is that they're iterations on classic type of noun phrases, really, like the something of the something was done this, or the adjective something of the something. It's sort of noun, preposition, noun type stuff. But there are some very interesting points about it, and there's a lot of variation which I will try to show you a bit of a little bit later on. So far with this kind of data, we basically know, well, these syntactically, this way of starting a sentence is more common than all the other things that didn't make it in the list. But what we haven't done yet is divided up the pie to find out what proportion of these falls in physical sciences, what proportion in arts and humanities. Again, would speak into the question of whether this language was useful for general academic purposes or specific. I went to a website called Sketch Engine to find out how many hits each of the structures had in the different disciplinary groups and in the different year groups. With that data, I was able to perform some statistical tests. The first thing to do was to find out the relative frequency of the appearance of these structures in the different disciplinary groups. There's an example of that here: horizontal gene transfer, determiner, adjective, noun, noun. 688 cases, but 280 of them are in physical sciences and only 60 in arts and humanities. So there's a calculation you make, which is the beginning of a chi-square calculation, where you work out the relative frequencies and the relative proportions. And I can tell you that that one appears much more frequently in physical sciences texts than arts and humanities texts. In order to consider the question of whether these structures are suitable for English general academic purposes, English for specific, I also used the statistic Kramer's V, which is a standardized effect size measure. Cohen suggested that a range of values here that should be considered moderate, and I found the middle value of the moderate, which for contingency tables of this size is a value of 0.23. It's a bit technical, but basically what that means is if there's a lot of variability, if the relative proportions are very variable, then the effect size measure goes up. And that means if you're saying it's applicable in all of these 4 disciplinary groups equally, you're basically kind of like smoothing over and rubbing out important peaks and troughs in the data. Peaks and troughs that could tell you, no, this is more a part of the disciplinary norms of one side or the other. So once you translate that into the actual percentage, you see the relative percentage for the same structure, 36% in arts and humanities and 163 in physical sciences. So I've marked this structure as variable. And by my criteria, I'm saying, well, I'm not sure if you really want to teach that in English for general academic purposes classes without marking the difference or without giving some kind of priority to it as a structure that appears in physical sciences texts. So I performed that statistical test for the disciplinary groups and the year groups, and what comes out is that if you accept that Kramer's V threshold as indicative of something, and it's slightly arbitrary, although it is the middle point of a known scale. It's more informative, for the community rather than, oh no, never do this. But 32 out of 50 of the structures that were available for this test, 32 of them were too variable by this criteria to be used for English for general academic purposes. 18 were sufficiently non-variable across the disciplines to be acceptable for that. When you look at it in terms of year groups, it's completely different. Most structures across year groups didn't have sufficient variation to say, oh no, this is a year 1 structure or this is a year 2 structure. Some kind of takeaways or discussion points about that, which we ought to think about really are, when you teach language, does this language you're teaching really correspond to the writing norms of the disciplinary group or discipline that you're preparing your students for? And also, given that there's not much variation across the year groups, by extension, students, accomplished writers in year 1 of undergraduate study are kind of hitting the ground with this full toolkit of formulaic type academic syntax ready to roll. Year 1, accomplished students, bang, bang, bang. It all comes out. It isn't kind of acquired later on. So as foundation year provision or pre-sessional provision, academic instruction of this type, getting it in before students start seems highly advisable. Interesting, formulaic syntax itself, if I can call it that, appears more frequently in physical sciences as a disciplinary group than it does in arts and humanities and in social sciences. It's quite a big difference. You can see the stat here, indicating perhaps that syntax is more variable in philosophy and English, and those kind of arts and humanities subjects, and perhaps a little bit more standardized in physical sciences and so on. The second data shows that year 1 and year 2, there's fairly standard amounts of this stuff, and then it starts decreasing in years 3 and 4, as if formulaic syntax is less depended upon in later study. There's also a difference there in terms of genre, which is a sort of a lost dimension here because it's a short presentation. But anyway, there's a greater emphasis on it from the writers at the beginning of their study journey. Academics such as Philip, Durant, and Nessie and Gardner, who are the main people behind the BOAR corpus, and it's the exploration of it in terms of the genre families. In their research, it comes up time and time again that actually disciplinary group is kind of too broad to really be a fully robust and meaningful category. And the more you go into the data, the more granular you get, getting deeper into it, you see variations, and this would be the true in any research really. But I've marked here high and low. Again, according to a slightly arbitrary measure, If the relative frequency is 140% or more, I've considered it high. Only 60, I've considered it low. So then you can see within, I'm looking at structure 2 here, the rise of medicine, and looking at social sciences. Don't forget this structure was marked as by the formal criteria as suitable for English for general academic purposes. But then when you go more under the bonnet, you see, well, hang on a minute, it's got a very high relative frequency for sociology and a much smaller for hospitality, publishing, anthropology. What's going on? I only looked at the first 13 structures like this in terms of frequency order because you're getting into much smaller sample sizes and you're having to split it across a wide range of subcategories. But it does tell a story that the apparent consistency that you get when you look under the bonnet, it isn't really there. And that's further pause for thought when we consider how our programs are structured and whether we're really providing targeted instruction on the writing norms for particular disciplines.
This spreadsheet is available for course planners. It contains 50 structures with at least 41 cases or more. It's all searchable by disciplinary group. Initially, it's sorted according just to frequency order in the whole corpus. If you want to look at, for example, what physical sciences students might want prioritized, you sort the sheet Z to A, highest totals first. The totals are based on relative frequencies. And you can see that the structures here that are highest often have these compound nouns. Compounding is a way to pack in information densely into noun phrases: sunset angle, gears program, service sector, doubling time value, 3 nouns together. It's very different when you sort according to arts and humanities. At the top, you get these named entities: Stalin, Hobbes, Cruikshank. You get high relative frequency for the structure, including the pronoun I or we and that kind of thing. So quite different. This spreadsheet allows course planners to prioritize structures in course design for specific language input. Imagine you're in class and you tell the students, yeah, this combination, adjective, noun, noun, horizontal gene transfer, that's actually quite common. And they're like, are you sure? That's really common in physical sciences. And you say, yeah, click on this link to find more examples. Every structure has this link. It takes you to Sketch Engine, where all 688 of these are available. Printed word lists, multiple cylinder engine, initial design layouts. They're all here and can be explored by students or teachers to see how these structures function in real student writing. It can also be narrowed down. There's a number of ways you can sort this, but if you click frequency in text types, and you say, okay, just show me the ones in physical sciences, then you can narrow down that list. There's still 280 of these. Monthly heat load, 3-phase induction motor, compound adjective in there, singular homology group, loads of great stuff, lots to explore to get a real feel for how the rhythm and the information density works in real accomplished student writing.
So I've touched on some issues relating to English for general academic purposes and English for specific academic purposes. And like a fractal, obviously, you can get more and more zoomed in. If you said, how long is the coastline of the UK, you'd have to decide on a point in which you stop measuring, because the further you go in, the more expansive it is. And it's like that with writing as well. But that's not an excuse to do the best we can. And certainly I think if we've got all students together in one room saying this is academic English, then that isn't the best thing for them. Dividing by disciplinary group would be an improvement on that, and you'll get more targeted provision that's more relevant more of the time. But the better way, really, and the gold standard, something we should be aiming for, is teaching the disciplinary norms of individual disciplines. And all of the data explorations that go beyond disciplinary group that I've read and look at individual disciplines, there's always a case for going into it. The norms of English, the norms of philosophy, the norms of maths, they do vary quite a lot. In this way, we could perhaps better equip our students for HE, especially those who come in and are genuine novice writers, and they're trying to get to that stage of having the same access to productive written language capabilities that these students have, so they can go into year one with a toolkit, hit the ground running, as those students did, not trying to acquire these things later on, especially in those disciplines where formulaic syntax is important. That's a short one. Contact me if you've got any questions, and please do download the spreadsheet, search it, and let me know if you use it or you find it useful. Thank you.